Okay, I'm going to read to you today the first chapter of Girlcott by Bermudian author Florenz Webbe Maxwell. So, chapter 1. Today was Friday, exactly 8 days, 192 hours, 11,520 minutes, or 691,200 seconds away. And those precious seconds were dripping from time while Mama listened to some gregarious caller. I'd almost twisted my ankle rushing into the kitchen to grab the telephone before it stopped ringing. But Mama was quicker. She had just put a casserole into the oven, yet she was able to snatch the receiver off the hook before the person hung up. "Is it Eileen?" I asked between gasps as I dropped my school bag on a nearby chair and rushed to stand next to her. Ignoring me, Mama pressed the receiver close to her ear, but not fast enough to block out the shrill, high-pitched voice coming from the other end. "No, this is not Desma. It's her mother, Mrs. Johnson," she said, but she didn't hand over the receiver even though I was close by, close enough I could pick up the scent of the Dixie peach she used in her hair. "I'll get her to call you." Without looking at me, she placed her finger to her lips, then gently pushed me aside. This gesture should have been hint enough for me to move away, but I didn't. I stood a half foot away watching her carve the receiver into her ear and nodding as 3 deep, short lines were etched into her forehead. This pantomime made me more impatient to use the telephone, for Eileen's call was important to me. My impatience must have oozed out an odor, for Mama flared her nostrils and gestured for me to move away completely. Instinctively, I plopped down on the nearest chair and clenched my fists in my lap. I knew now the conversation couldn't be interrupted, for bad manners to Mama was equal to waving a red flag in front of the proverbial bull. Instead, I closed my eyes and trained to concentrate on solving the problem at hand. My best friend Eileen was helping me to put together last-minute plans for my 16th birthday celebration next Saturday. Birthday invitations were sent out 2 months ago when I invited 6 girlfriends for a sleepover on Friday and a beach party at Deep Bay on Saturday. Papa had made the surprise change yesterday, right in this very kitchen in front of Mama and me. "I'm going to treat your whole class to the movies as a birthday gift," he said, when I told him and Mama that Mr. Lewis, my headmaster, announced in a special assembly that I had excelled in the Oxford external exams. The examiners in England wrote that I had surpassed many students in the Commonwealth when I passed 13 of my subjects with top marks. I don't know how my feet took me on that stage when I was called in front of the whole school and congratulated. All I remember was that Mr. Lewis said I brought honor to not only my tiny island, but to the whole Negro race. The biggest and best part of this news is that I stand a good chance of getting the Empire Scholarship and being accepted into a prestigious college to become an actuary after graduating from Collegiate Institute. This morning, when I made the announcement, a roar went up from the class, and the 2 class clowns, Dedrick Smith and Hugh Hawkins, hooped and hollered as they slapped me on the back. "You mean we'll see Yul Brynner in the Buccaneer?" someone at the back of the room screamed out. The roar following the announcement seemed to rattle the windows, and my heart did a double flip a few seconds later when head boy George Strong squeezed my shoulder and said, "Everything you do turns out so special. Thanks, Desma." He was the most popular boy in school, and this was no wonder because he was good-looking and an outstanding student. George also had the distinction of being captain of Greenhouse, winning every trophy in cricket and football. For our first 2 years at Collegiate Institute, he struggled to beat me in maths and once said that I was just lucky because girls were not supposed to be good in the subject. I told him that if both of our brains were put in a jar, his wouldn't be wearing pants and mine a dress. I would be the last to admit that my feelings for him had changed, but I knew in my heart that he was the main reason I wanted my birthday celebration to be successful. I burst with pride when my favorite teacher, Mrs. Burrows, gave me a maths book with equation puzzles to solve. "I feel you'll enjoy this more than a card," she said, hugging me. "One day you'll write your own maths book. You have done us all proud." "It's all through you," I said, forgetting my dignity and jumping up and down. "You made me enjoy maths ever since my first day here. I would never think of becoming an actuary if it hadn't been for you." When school dismissed the next day, I was still flying high after announcing Papa's gift to the class. I rushed home to make up new invitations. Although it's 1959, parents are still particular about etiquette, and I was not taking any chances in spoiling my reputation for being well-raised. In order to expedite matters, Eileen remained behind at school to get names and addresses so that I could make up invitations to be handed out on Monday. I pushed back the chair and was about to leave the room when Mama, who was now frowning, placed the receiver back on the hook. She strolled over to the table and sat down on the chair opposite me. That was Bridget Wallace, the woman you babysit for, she told me, as if I didn't know who Bridget Wallace was. Before I could respond, she added, that call wasn't about babysitting. If she didn't want me to babysit Fiona, what was that long conversation about? It was my turn to frown. Mrs. Wallace was the only person I ever babysat for, and I hadn't done that in over a year, while I was studying for the Oxbridge exam. The last time I had gone over to babysit, Mrs. Wallace told me without any previous warning that her daughter, Almira, had decided she wanted to babysit, so I was not needed that evening. I never mentioned the incident to Mama because I knew she wasn't keen on Mrs. Wallace ever since she said I was the only colored person she trusted in her house beside her maid Janet. Mrs. Wallace even tried to flatter Mama by saying that we were different from most colored families because I was trained to be honest and polite. After those remarks, Mama wanted me to stop babysitting, but I convinced her that Mrs. Wallace treated me with respect and gave me extra babysitting money. Fiona was not an easy 4-year-old, but she liked the bedtime stories I read to her and the hand games we played. Mrs. Wallace started bragging to Almira that I was more of a big sister to Fiona than she was, and in turn, Almira started making catty remarks behind her mother's back. Her snotty attitude reminded me of Bella Smith, one of my classmates. Eventually, Almira was sent to a boarding school in the United States, and I breathed volumes of relief. Mama's frown filled me with foreboding. What did Mrs. Wallace want? Mama tapped on the table with the tips of her fingers and then looked up at the ceiling. I could tell by the way she bit her bottom lip she was organizing her thoughts. Finally, with a sigh, she said, Mrs. Wallace wants you to come over this afternoon for a bite to eat. I almost fell over the table laughing. Surely that long conversation was more than my going to the Wallaces for a bite to eat. Mama made it sound like the Last Supper. Who's doing the biting and who's doing the eating? I asked, my eyes opening wider than my mouth. Reaching over, Mama swatted my hand. Don't be fresh, Desma. She got up and began wiping off the table with the hem of her apron. There was nothing visible to wipe, so I knew she was holding something back. When she turned to face me, she said, Bridget Wallace's exact words were, I would like Desma to come over for a bite to eat. I don't get it. I was confused. To be honest, I don't get it either, but my gut feeling is that she really wants to see you about something. See me for what? I had never known Mrs. Wallace to be secretive. She always said exactly what was on her mind. Should I go? I felt a queer knot in the bottom of my stomach. That's entirely up to you, Mama said, still frowning. She just went on and on about how wonderful you are and how good you are with that child. Fiona. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. As if that wasn't obvious, I thought with a smile. The ball in my stomach dissolved and was replaced by silent bubbles of laughter. It was obvious that Mama was making a mountain out of a molehill. But what Mama said next popped my humor. Before you call Mrs. Wallace, I want you to think the matter over carefully. What matter? My eyes were stretching so wide, I was sure they would pop out of my head. I hoped the matter had nothing to do with my birthday plans, for that right now was the most important thing on my mind. What matter, Mama? The matter about the boycott that's rumored to be happening soon, she said slowly. What boycott? You mean the one some progressive group is planning? What's that got to do with me? This conversation was getting me further and further away from my birthday plans with Eileen. That's the confusing part. She kept bringing up the boycott. She said she's worried because colored people are involved, and she doesn't want you to be in danger if there's a riot. And she kept saying she missed not seeing you and wondered if you would come over for a bite to eat. This was making no sense at all. George Strong brought up the boycott in civics class yesterday. He said it was to be soon, but nobody knew when it was supposed to happen. Our teacher, Mrs. Goldenrod, explained that colored people in Bermuda were tired of segregation, but she didn't think we would be foolish enough to get involved in some boycott planned by some anonymous progressive group. Mama, from what I understand, this boycott is just a rumor and nobody's really worried about it. So why is Mrs. Wallace going on about something that may not even happen? Mama didn't answer my question. All she said was that I should just call Mrs. Wallace and decide whether or not I wanted to go over and have this bite to eat. Nothing Mama was telling me made sense. Yes, Bermuda was segregated. I knew that much. Colored people couldn't go to certain places like hotels and restaurants, but that didn't bother me. Papa was making good money from his garage, and because he did such good work, he had customers from all over the island. Once, he even serviced the governor's car. It's true that I live in an all-colored neighborhood, and I'll be graduating from an all-colored school, and I even go to an all-colored church, but my all-colored life is a pretty color. Why should I get all worked up about because an anonymous group wants to change the colors? And look at me. I want to be an actuary and am in line for the Empire Scholarship. Being colored hasn't stopped me from enjoying my life. I think Mrs. Wallace is worried because the boycott involves the Island Theater. Her house is just a stone's throw from there. The Island Theater? Mama, that's where I'm supposed to be taking my class. That progressive group can't be planning a boycott that would ruin my birthday plans. My eyes were popping out of my head again, and I must have looked like a raving maniac, for Mama came over and put her arm on around my shoulder. Desma, don't you start, she said. Your party is next week. It's not likely anything will take place before then. This is Bermuda. Nobody's in a hurry to do anything. We were both silent for a while, and then Mama was the first to speak. Ordinarily, I would think twice about your going to Mrs. Wallace. Taking my hand, she gave me a squeeze and pulled my face down to hers. I'm not sure what's going on with that woman. She has a habit of making statements about colored people that don't make sense. She did go on and on about Fiona missing you, so I believe that's true. Just let her know what you intend to do. She already made 2 calls before you came home. 2? I backed away from Mama's grasp, and I felt as if my jaw had dropped down to my waist. Why in the world would she call twice for me to come over for something to eat? She didn't mention something to eat until her last call. Mama walked over to the oven, opened the door, and released the aroma of tuna, onions, pepper, and thyme, all floating in the creamy, cheesy sauce. My mouth sprang water, but I swallowed quickly and turned back to hear what Mama was saying. Her eyes fastened on my face. It's obvious that Mrs. Wallace thought you were going to answer the phone. When I let her know she was talking to me, she ran on and on about Fiona missing you and that she would like to see you. I'm leaving you to make up your own mind. In the end, I accepted the invitation, and Mama promised to handle Eileen's phone call. Bermuda's speed limit is 20 miles an hour, but Mama drove our car at 16 to avoid breaking the law. Therefore, the ride from Loquat Lane to Mrs. Wallace's house on Juniper Road took us a half hour instead of 15 minutes. I closed my eyes to prevent my impatience from popping out on my face, and in doing so, I shut out my favorite scene of the sea. So calm it matched the cloudless sky that separated it by a navy blue line. If Papa hadn't changed my birthday plans, I would have had a beach party at Deep Bay, swimming in the calm waters and digging my toes into the cool white sand. Eileen had argued about going on to the Pink Beach on the south side of the island, but 2 of my guests were not strong swimmers, and I was afraid they would have difficulty with high waves and strong undercurrent. We finally reached Juniper Road, and Mama gave me a long, hard squeeze before I hopped out of the car. Call me when you're through, she said, eyeing me from head to toe. You look quite nice. Just keep that off-the-shoulder blouse well on your shoulders. I giggled as I adjusted the neck. I had changed out of my school uniform and liked the way I looked in my lilac cotton skirt with the row of morning glories flowers going around the hem. The matching crinoline slit made the skirt stand off just enough so that I could admire my newly polished brown and white saddle shoes and bobby socks. You should be all right, she said, getting ready to drive off. Worry seemed to drip from her words. One thing's certain, you have a sensible head on your shoulders. Mama, I'm just going to Mrs. Wallace's for a bite to eat. Stop worrying. It's not a lynching party. Mama didn't find my remark amusing. She reached over and patted my hand. You young people have a lot to learn, she muttered. Those who have no experience think the sound of weeping is singing. It wasn't what Mama had said that made a lump start forming in my chest. It was the expression on her face that I could not put into words. But then again, I was always better with numbers than words. Under normal circumstances, this lumpy feeling starting in my throat would be turned into an equation. I would work out Mrs. Wallace's bite to eat at 5:30 in the afternoon and measure the distance her house was from the theater. Then I would have to figure out how the whole business affected the boycott that no one was taking seriously. There was a problem in the air, and I was curious about the answer. Mama squeezed my hand so hard that any thought of the equation disappeared into the maths part of my brain. You don't have to go if you don't want to, she said, her eyes revealing that she hoped I would decline the invitation. If I don't like the bite to eat, I'll come right on back for that delicious tuna casserole. We both laughed, and I reached into the car and gave her a hug. My laugh turned into a grin as I watched her drive out of Juniper Road, pressing the 20-mile-an-hour limit to the end of its patience.